Hello, crafty friends. My name is Jessica, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have a card using the Friendship Leafy Cluster set from Simon Says Stamp's January release. These are some of the colors I'll be using in the Positively Saturated line. That was Sunbeam, Artichoke, Kale, and Cabbage. In this card, I'm going for a no line ink blending technique. So what I'm doing is I'm using Sunbeam, which is a color of ink that matches this paper. And so we don't see it, but I'll be able to line my stencil up. So here's just a quick shot of it where it's there, but it's not really that bright. So you're not going to see it once I start ink blending. Typically, this technique is done with watercoloring, colored pencil, or Copic markers, where you use a really light colored ink, such as gray, and then you color onto it so that you get this really loose, whimsical feel to the images that you're coloring. But since this stamp set came with stencils, I went ahead and tried this with stencils, and I really love the results that I achieved. So now I'm just getting started with the three colors I plan on using for these Friendship Leafy Clusters and two of my ink blending brushes. I don't believe I end up using the big one for these, so I went ahead and we're using the medium size, or I think what they call them online is small. But in my trio of brushes, this is considered the medium size. And I'm just getting started using Artichoke, which is the medium green in this trio set. I'm going to start with Artichoke and then move into Cabbage, the lighter green, for the first layer of all of these leafy clusters. Then I'm going to build on top a little bit differently, and we'll talk about that when I get there. Now, there is a reason why I chose this warm, wild honey colored cardstock. In my yard, I have a ginormous weeping willow, and the leaves, when it's starting to turn to fall, go from green to a yellow tip and then all the way to yellow before they fall off for winter. So that's the vision I had. I wanted to use a yellow base, not only because it would be good for the no line coloring, because the yellows matched so well, but also because I wanted to create that feeling that the yellow color was going to come through the green, which would simulate the leaves on my willow tree in the fall. I absolutely fell in love with this stamp set and all the add-ons that you can get for it. I have made many cards using this set, and you can find those on my Instagram and my blog for the Simon Says Stamp blog hop that I did earlier in the month. But I just love this stamp set. And with the addition of being able to buy the stencils, the options are absolutely endless on how you can create these leaves in so many different ways. One of my favorite cards I made from this release using this set was stamping these leaves on black and embossing them in gold embossing powder and then putting them on a really fun background. That I think was my favorite card from the whole release. But it's just amazing how many things you can use these leaves for and get so many different results. Now we're going in with layer number two, and I'm going to start with the darkest color, Kale. And I'm doing this because when you're using inks or paints and you're doing flowers or anything for that matter, your darkest colors are going to be in the foreground and then they're going to get lighter as you head back. At least that's what I'm remembering from my high school art days. So that's what I'm using the darkest color on top so that you get that dimension of the leaves with the no line. It's hard to get the differentiation between them. So using the darker ink and then going into that middle ink Artichoke, we're creating those layers without having to have the outlines to indicate them as such. For the most part, I have been able to hide those yellow lines from the stamped image with my ink blending over top. But there are a couple where I didn't quite get the stencil lined up appropriately that you'll see, but they're pretty subtle, if I do say so myself. And so they blend into the cardstock and you don't see them as much as you might a dark black outline. Now we're going to go ahead and jump to the future where I have finished all of these leafy clusters and we're getting ready to start on the background panel. This is a panel of Neenah Desert Storm, and I knew I was going to be popping up these leafy clusters, and so I wanted to create a little bit of dimension So I'm using latte and I'm going all over the panel, not paying any particular attention on where I'm putting the color. I'm just kind of laying it down to make it look a little bit more dimensional and not so flat. I really like how this latte color blends in with this Neenah Desert Storm. It's a pretty good match. I didn't want harsh lines, so that's why I picked this lighter brown. I also wanted to add a little bit of splatter, and this black soot distress paint is one of my most favorite for this. It is the perfect consistency for creating splatter. You don't have to add water or any other medium to have the most beautiful little black droplets on your panels or projects. Now, for one of my most favorite parts, the fiddling of the objects. I am such a fiddler when it comes to most card building. And so here I am just laying out the leaves in all the different sizes and different ways the leaves are going. And then I'm using Simon Says Stamp foam squares to pop these up. I'm kind of eyeballing where those leaves are on the panel, so not covering all of them with the foam squares so I don't lose any, but just trying to create a little bit of dimension by popping these leaves up with those foam squares. Simon Says Stamp does have two different thicknesses, and I believe these are the thicker ones. I'm not exactly sure, but I'll make sure that they're linked in the comments below to all the foam squares. But I like the two different sizes. Sometimes I can get my cards a little too thick, and having a thinner foam square allows me to be more mindful of that for mailing purposes. Because if you have too thick of a card, sometimes you have to pay higher shipping depending on who's working that day, but this help alleviates you getting too thick and still makes it manageable to fit into the proper postage. Now, who can relate to living in the country? And maybe this happens in cities too. But I live in the middle of a cornfield and I get those darned Japanese beetles so bad. And so tonight, or the night that I was filming this, there was a Japanese beetle that would not leave my ring light alone. It was constantly swooping in and trying to get me. So I apologize for that. I did have to cut some of the video because I hit my light trying to get it away from me, but it is living here now apparently, and I'm sure it will not be the last time that a Japanese beetle tries to make its entrance into my videos. Because I live in farmland, I think that's why we tend to get an abundance of them during this time of year and even like late fall, early winter. They're coming into the house to try to winter for the season in hopes that they survive and are able to live out another year come spring. Now that we have all of these leaves adhered to the card panel, I need to trim off the excess. And my favorite way of doing this is to flip the panel upside down and use these Simon Says Stamp scissors because I swear no adhesive sticks to them. But I like to turn the panel over so that I can see what I'm cutting and try to get as close to the edge as possible. I recommend doing this so you can see what you're doing. If you're trying to cut from the top, you might accidentally cut into the back of the panel, and then your panel's not going to be square when you go to adhere it down to your card base. I'm really loving how this no line stencil blending worked out. But now it's time to figure out what sentiment I'm going to use. I loved this stamp set because it comes with sentiments and sentiment dies. I like a sentiment die that goes really close to the words. So I really loved this Friends die from this set. So I'm glad I could use it. I'm really using the whole set in one card today, which is great. You don't have to pull out different sentiments to try to finish off a card. This is my absolute favorite embossing powder. This is the Antique Gold from Simon Says Stamp. Since I added the latte to the back of the panel, I wanted to add a little bit more here to our sentiment strips. It's not going to be super noticeable, but just to kind of get those tones of the cardstock close together, I felt like I needed to add that. I'm using my mini Tim Holtz die cutting machine. This is great. I don't ever have to suction cup it down to this mat, which is a blessing because it doesn't like to stick for very long. I'm able to just put my hand on it and apply enough pressure so that you don't feel like you have to suction cup it. Now I'm trimming down the additional sentiment that I'm adding, and I love this little mini trimmer because I can get really close to the sentiment. I like to have trimmed up sentiments and appreciate this guillotine trimmer allowing me to do that. And then also these Simon Says Stamp scissors. It wasn't quite close enough after I held it next to the other one, so I was able to trim it down a little bit more using those scissors. Now, time for the card base. I use Neenah 110-pound card bases, and I absolutely love this weight for that. And then I did decide not to create a border. I am on a roll with those, not putting a border on my cards. But because I trim my own card bases, sometimes they get a little wonky. And so I do like to trim off a little bit on each side of the top and the side panel there that's not folded so that I can ensure that my card base fits and you won't see any of the white around the outside. Now, after reviewing this, I was going to put some Doris foam squares on the back, but decided not to on that friend die. It was a little too thin and it was going to take too long to try to figure out how to put all of those foam strips on there and be able to hide them. So a trick to creating depth for your thinner die cuts like this, or any die cuts, if you'd like, you could do it for any of them, is to just cut out the shadow as many times as you'd like to get the depth that you want. So for this one, I did 3, and then the added one that's been embossed would be 4 layers total. And this is Neenah Desert Storm 80-pound. And that gave me enough of a depth to go ahead and feel like it looked good on a card. So once I had that all glued down, I'm able to put it onto the panel and get the other sentiment lined up for it to be complete. So for the sentiment, I did choose I'm so happy we're friends. And again, this is all from the Friendship Leafy Cluster set. It's the only set I used to create this card, and it's a great little set with all of the add-ons once you get the stencils and the dies to create beautiful, beautiful cards. Once we're done with this, I'm going to go ahead and add some sparkle using some Trinity Stamps gold coin metallic confetti. I love confetti over jewels or pearls. They tend to be my go-to, and I like them way more than sequins. For some reason, the middle of sequins being cut out bothers me, and I can't tell you why, but I will not use sequins, but I'll use confetti all day, every day. So that's it. That's the card. I appreciate you guys coming and joining with me today, and I hope that you were able to get some inspiration for some cards. I have all the products listed below as well as on my blog, and I'm glad that you were able to stop in and see me today. Take care.